The sky above London was bright blue on the morning of the big day. Not a cloud could be seen. This was rare for England, where rain and gray skies were common. It seemed even the weather wanted to celebrate the new king. Inside Kensington Palace, the home of Prince William and his family, everyone was awake early. The palace staff had been up since dawn, moving quickly through the halls. Today was King Charles's coronation, and William's family had important roles to play. Prince William stood in his room, looking at himself in a tall mirror. He wore his military uniform, decorated with shiny medals that showed his service to the country. His face was serious as he straightened his collar one last time. At 40 years old, William knew this day marked a new chapter for his father, but also brought him one step closer to his own future as king. In the next room, Kate was helping their daughter, Charlotte, get ready. Kate wore a beautiful dress in soft cream color with tiny flowers sewn into the fabric. On her head sat a small tiara that sparkled in the morning light. Charlotte's dress matched her mother's, but in a simpler style fit for a young princess. At 8 years old, Charlotte stood very still, trying her best to be grown up, as Kate fixed a small flower in her hair. "You look beautiful," Kate told her daughter with a warm smile. "Remember to walk slowly like we practiced." Charlotte nodded. "Like great-grandmother would have," she said, thinking of Queen Elizabeth, who had died the year before. Kate's eyes grew soft at the mention of the late queen. Yes, exactly like that. Nearby, 10-year-old Prince George was already dressed in his own small version of formal wear. He practiced bowing, counting in his head as he had been taught. George understood more than his siblings about what today meant. As second in line to the throne, he paid close attention to every lesson about royal duties. 5-year-old Prince Louis was having a harder time. He pulled at his tight collar and frowned at his shiny shoes. "I don't like these clothes," he complained to his nanny, who was trying to comb his hair. "They're too tight." "Just for today, Your Highness," the nanny said kindly. "Everyone has to dress up for your grandfather's special day." From across the room, William called out to his youngest son, "Louis, come here." The little boy walked over, still pulling at his collar. William knelt down to be at eye level with him. "I know these clothes aren't comfortable," William said in a low voice that only Louis could hear. "I didn't like them when I was your age either." Louis looked surprised. "Really?" William nodded. "Really. But today is very important for Grandpa. And do you know what? Millions of people will be watching us. They love to see you smile and wave." Louis thought about this. "Like I'm in a movie." William laughed. "A bit like that. And just like in a movie, we all have our parts to play. Your job is to be brave and show everyone what a big boy you are now. Can you do that?" The little prince stood straighter and nodded. "I can do it." In the main hall of the apartment, Kate gathered the family together. The children stood in a line as she looked them over one final time. William joined them, placing his hand gently on Kate's back. "Are we all ready?" he asked, looking at each child. George nodded seriously. Charlotte smoothed her dress. Louis gave a small salute that made everyone laugh. Breaking the tension, a palisade appeared at the doorway. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars are ready." Kate took a deep breath. "This is a day our children will remember their whole lives," she said quietly to William. He squeezed her hand. "Together then," he replied. The family walked toward the doors. Outside, the motorcade waited to take them to Westminster Abbey, where 1,000 years of history and tradition awaited them. As they stepped into the sunshine, bells began to ring across London, announcing that Coronation Day had officially begun. The royal motorcade moved slowly through the streets of London. 3 black cars with small flags on their hoods drove in a neat line. Police officers on motorcycles rode in front and behind them. Inside the main car, Prince William sat tall, looking out at the crowds that lined both sides of the road. "Look at all the people," Louis said, pressing his face against the window. Thousands of people stood behind barriers, waving small British flags and holding up phones to take pictures. Kate gently pulled Louis back from the window. "Sit properly, darling. Remember what we talked about." The little boy nodded and sat up straight like his brother and sister, but his eyes still moved quickly, taking in all the excitement outside. George, always serious, asked, "Father, are there more people here than at great-grandmother's funeral?" William thought for a moment. "I think so. This is a happy day, so more people want to be part of it." Charlotte pointed to a group of children waving excitedly. "They have our pictures on their signs." Kate smiled. "People love to see you children. You bring them joy." As their car passed Trafalgar Square, William began to point out important buildings to the children. "That's where I went to school sometimes," he said, showing them a grand old building. "And over there is where your grandfather worked for many years before becoming king." The children listened carefully. Even Louis stopped fidgeting to hear his father's stories. "Will I work there too someday?" George asked. William put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Someday, yes, but not for a long time." The car turned onto a wide street called the Mall, which led straight to Buckingham Palace. Here, the crowds were even bigger. People stood 10 rows deep, climbing on each other's shoulders to get a better view. Some had camped out all night to get the best spots. "Wave to them," Kate reminded the children. The 3 young royals raised their hands and waved through the windows. The crowds cheered louder when they saw the children. "They can't really see us through these dark windows, can they?" Charlotte asked. "They can see enough," William answered. "And it means a lot to them that we acknowledge them." As they got closer to Westminster Abbey, the cars slowed down even more. Police officers stood at every corner. Important-looking people in fancy clothes were walking into the Abbey. "I'm nervous," Charlotte whispered to her mother. Kate took her daughter's hand. "That's normal. I still get nervous too." "Even you, Mother?" George asked, surprised. Kate nodded. "Even me. But we just take a deep breath and remember what to do. One step at a time." William looked at his watch. "We're right on schedule. We'll wait in the side room for a few minutes before we walk in." The car finally stopped at a special entrance to the side of the Abbey. It was away from the main doors where cameras were set up. This would give the family time to prepare. A man in a fancy uniform opened the car door. William stepped out first and turned to help Kate. Her dress sparkled in the sunlight as she stepped carefully onto the red carpet that had been laid out. The children followed, remembering to stand tall and keep their hands at their sides. Louis took his mother's hand, suddenly shy with all the official people watching them. A lady in a black suit came over to them. "Your Royal Highnesses, everything is ready. The king has just left Buckingham Palace." William nodded and looked at his family. "This is it. Are we all ready?" The children looked up at their father. Even though they were young, they understood how important this day was. "Ready, father," George said. "Ready," echoed Charlotte with a small curtsy that made the officials smile. Louis gave a thumbs up that wasn't exactly proper royal behavior, but made everyone around them relax and smile. William and Kate shared a quick look. In that silent moment, they recognized their shared pride in their children. "Let's go then," William said. "Grandfather is about to become king, and we need to take our places." Together, the family walked toward the ancient doors of Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens have been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. Behind those heavy wooden doors, history waited for them. The inside of Westminster Abbey was like nothing the children had ever seen before, even though they had visited for practice. Today was different. Hundreds of candles lit the space with a warm glow. Flowers in white, gold, and blue filled every corner. The sweet smell of incense floated in the air. "It's like a fairy tale," Charlotte whispered, her eyes wide as she looked up at the high ceiling. A man in a red and gold uniform approached them. He bowed slightly to William and Kate. "Your Royal Highnesses, please follow me to your seats." William nodded and put his hand on George's shoulder. The family began to walk down the long aisle. The Abbey was already full of people. Kings and queens from other countries sat in the front rows. Famous actors, sports stars, and important leaders filled the other seats. As the family walked, everyone turned to look at them. The guests smiled and whispered to each other about how grown-up the children looked. Louis waved at a few people he recognized, making them smile even more. Kate leaned down to Louis. "Remember, we walk slowly and keep our eyes forward," she said softly. The little boy tried his best, but there was so much to see. His head turned from side to side, taking in all the colors and faces. They reached their special seats in the front row. These seats were directly across from where King Charles would sit during the ceremony. William helped the children get settled, making sure their clothes looked neat. "Where's grandfather?" Louis asked, looking around. "He'll come in last," William explained. "Everyone else must be seated before the king arrives." George sat up very straight, trying to look mature. At 10 years old, he understood that someday he would be in his grandfather's place. Charlotte smoothed her dress and folded her hands in her lap, copying the way her mother sat. More important guests continued to arrive. The Prime Minister walked in wearing a dark suit. Leaders from countries all around the world followed. Some wore bright traditional clothes from their homelands. Kate noticed Charlotte watching a princess from another country who wore a beautiful blue dress with a matching hat. "Do you like her outfit?" Kate asked quietly. Charlotte nodded. "Her hat has butterflies on it," she whispered back. "Perhaps you can tell her later. It's good to give compliments," Kate said with a smile. Suddenly, music filled the abbey. The choir began to sing, their voices rising to the ceiling in perfect harmony. This was the signal that the ceremony would start soon. William checked his watch and then looked toward the main doors. Any minute now, his father would enter. Louis tugged on his father's sleeve. "How long will this take?" he asked. "I'm already sitting still." William tried not to smile. "It's a very important day. We need to be patient." Kate reached into her small bag and took out a tiny book, no bigger than her palm. She handed it to Louis. "Look at this while we wait," she said. It was a picture book about kings and queens of England, made specially for the children to help them understand the day. Louis opened it carefully and began looking at the pictures. George leaned over to see too, pointing out facts he already knew about their ancestors. The music grew louder, and a line of people in fancy robes began to walk down the aisle. They carried special items that would be used in the ceremony. A golden ball called the orb, a scepter with a huge diamond, and ancient swords. "It's starting," William said to his family. Charlotte sat up straighter. George closed the book and handed it back to his mother. Even Louis put on his serious face. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the most important church leader in England, walked to the front and turned to face everyone. He wore flowing gold and white robes with a tall hat. "Please stand for His Majesty King Charles II," a voice announced. Everyone in the abbey rose to their feet. William looked at his children with pride as they stood perfectly, just as they had practiced. The great doors at the end of the abbey swung open. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. King Charles walked slowly down the long aisle of Westminster Abbey. He wore a simple dark red robe with golden threads woven through it. His wife Camilla, the queen consort, walked a few steps behind him. Everyone in the abbey stood perfectly still and quiet. William felt a rush of emotions as he watched his father. He remembered being a small boy, holding his mother's hand at official events. He thought about all the years his father had waited for this moment. Now it was finally happening. Louis tugged at William's sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa looks different." William bent down. "That's because today he becomes the king," he whispered back. As Charles passed their row, he turned slightly toward his family. His face was serious, but his eyes softened when he saw his grandchildren standing tall. George gave a perfect small bow of his head. Charlotte did a tiny curtsy. Louis, trying to copy his siblings, did a mix of both that made Charles's lips twitch with a hidden smile. The king continued to the front of the abbey where a special chair waited. This chair was called the Coronation throne. It was very old and had been used by kings and queens for hundreds of years. Under the seat was a large stone called the Stone of Scone. This stone came from Scotland and was part of royal history. Kate leaned close to Charlotte. "Remember I told you about that chair?" she whispered. The little princess nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood in front of Charles and began to speak. He talked about duty, service, and God. His voice echoed through the abbey. Some of the words were old-fashioned and hard to understand, even for adults. Louis started to fidget after a few minutes. Kate gently touched his hand, reminding him to be still. She pulled a small mint candy from her purse and slipped it to him. This small treat was their secret way to help him stay quiet during long ceremonies. "Thank you," Louis mouthed silently to his mother. The ceremony continued with songs and prayers. Men and women in special clothes brought forward the crown, which sat on a red pillow. It sparkled with diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones. The large purple stone in the center was as big as a child's fist. George's eyes grew wide at the sight of the crown. William noticed and leaned over. "One day, many years from now, that will be placed on your head," he said very quietly. George swallowed hard and nodded. He looked both scared and proud at the same time. The most important part of the ceremony began. Charles knelt before the Archbishop, who placed oil on the king's head and hands. This was called the anointing. It was so sacred that large screens were put up, so no one could see this private moment. While this happened, William glanced at Kate. Their eyes met, sharing thoughts without words. They both knew this ceremony brought them one step closer to their own future roles. Charlotte noticed her parents looking at each other. She reached out and took her mother's hand. Even at her young age, she sensed the weight of this moment for her family. When the screens were removed, Charles was wearing a new white robe. The Archbishop lifted the heavy crown high for everyone to see. The gold and jewels caught the light from every direction, sending sparkles across the walls of the abbey. The abbey grew completely silent. Even Louis stopped moving. Every person held their breath as the Archbishop slowly lowered the crown onto Charles's head. "God save the King," the Archbishop called out in a loud voice. "God save the King," everyone repeated. William's voice rang out clear and strong. Kate's eyes shined with tears. George and Charlotte said the words carefully, pronouncing each one. Even Louis joined in, his small voice adding to the powerful sound that filled the ancient building. In that moment, as the words echoed off the stone walls, something changed. The man they had always known as father, father-in-law, and grandfather was now truly the King of England. Charles sat taller in the throne, the weight of the crown matched by the weight of his new role. After the crown was placed on Charles's head, the ceremony continued. The king moved to a bigger throne that stood on a platform with steps. This throne was covered in gold and had lions carved on its arms. Charles sat down, holding a special rod in one hand and a golden ball in the other. These items showed his power as king. William watched his father with pride. He remembered how Charles had taught him about duty and service to the country. Now, his father was showing these values to the whole world. The next part of the ceremony was very important for William. He walked forward from his seat, leaving Kate and the children. The abbey went quiet as he approached his father. William knelt on one knee in front of the throne. "I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, my king and my father," William said in a clear voice that everyone could hear. William placed his hands between his father's hands and bowed his head. This was called the homage, a promise of loyalty. It was especially meaningful because William was not just a subject pledging to his king. He was a son honoring his father. King Charles looked down at his son with deep emotion in his eyes. For a brief moment, they were not king and prince, but father and son. Charles gently squeezed William's hands before releasing them. As William returned to his seat, George watched with wide eyes. One day, it would be his turn to make this promise to his father. "Did you do well, father?" George whispered when William sat down. William smiled at his son. I hope so. Louis had been sitting still for a long time now. He swung his legs back and forth under his chair. Kate gently placed her hand on his knee to remind him to be still. The little boy sighed but stopped moving. Is it almost over? He whispered to his mother. Not much longer, Kate assured him with a small smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny toy soldier, no bigger than her thumb. She slipped it into Louis's hand. His face lit up, but he remembered to keep quiet as he examined the tiny figure. The ceremony continued with more prayers and songs. The choir's voices filled the abbey with beautiful music. Charlotte loved music and singing. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the voices wash over her. Kate noticed and smiled at her daughter's appreciation for the moment. After the main ceremony, King Charles and Queen Camilla moved to a private area of the abbey. There, they would change into different robes and crowns for the next part of the day. This gave everyone a short break. You've all been so good, William told his children. Especially you, Louis. The little boy beamed with pride at his father's words. A lady-in-waiting brought small sandwiches and water for the family. They hadn't eaten since early morning, and the ceremony had already lasted nearly 2 hours. These are cucumber, Charlotte said, looking at her sandwich. The Queen's favorite, Kate explained, meaning Queen Elizabeth, who had loved cucumber sandwiches. Great-grandmother is watching us today, isn't she? George asked seriously. William and Kate shared a look. I believe she is, William said softly. While they ate their small snack, important people came by to greet them. The Prime Minister stopped to compliment the children on their behavior. A king from a country far away told George he would make a fine king someday. The children remembered to say thank you and to be polite, just as they had practiced. Louis tugged on William's sleeve. Father, when grandfather comes back, will he still be able to play with us like before? It was a simple question, but an important one. William bent down to his youngest son's level. He will always be your grandfather first, William assured him. The crown doesn't change that. It just means he has more important work to do for the country. Louis nodded, understanding in his own way. Family came first, even for kings. Soon, trumpets sounded again. This meant King Charles and Queen Camilla were ready to return. The royal family stood up and straightened their clothes. The second part of the ceremony was about to begin. This part would include a special blessing for William and Kate as the next king and queen in waiting. King Charles and Queen Camilla returned to the main part of Westminster Abbey. The king now wore a purple robe with white fur trim. On his head was a different crown, lighter than the first one but just as beautiful. Queen Camilla wore a white dress and a smaller crown with diamonds. The abbey was filled with the sound of trumpets as they walked back to their thrones. Everyone stood up again. William noticed that Louis was starting to look tired, but the little boy tried his best to stand tall like his brother and sister. Not much longer, William whispered to his children. The Archbishop called William and Kate forward. This was not part of most coronations, but King Charles had wanted to honor his son and daughter-in-law in a special way. William took Kate's hand, and they walked together to stand before the king and queen. Kate looked beautiful in her white dress and small tiara. Many people in the abbey whispered about how much she looked like a queen already. Charlotte watched her mother with pride, hoping she would be just as elegant when she grew up. The Archbishop placed his hands above William and Kate's heads, but did not touch them. He said a special prayer for them, asking God to help them prepare for their future roles as king and queen. William and Kate bowed their heads during the prayer. George paid very close attention to this part. He knew this was about his parents' future, which was connected to his own future too. Charlotte held Louis's hand to keep him still during this solemn moment. When the prayer was finished, something unexpected happened. King Charles stood up and stepped toward William. This was not planned in the ceremony. The king took off a ring from his finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to Prince Philip, William's grandfather. Charles placed it in William's palm and closed his son's fingers around it. No words were spoken. But the message was clear. This was a father passing on a family treasure to his son. It was a private moment that happened in front of thousands of people, yet somehow felt intimate. Kate's eyes filled with tears. She had loved Prince Philip and knew how much this ring meant to the family. William swallowed hard and gave a small nod to his father, showing his thanks without words. As William and Kate returned to their seats, Louis whispered a bit too loudly, "What did Grandpa give you?" Several people nearby smiled at the little boy's question. William showed the ring to his children very quickly before putting it in his pocket. "It was great-grandfather's," he told them quietly. "I'll tell you more about it later." The ceremony continued with more music and prayers. The choir sang songs that had been sung at coronations for hundreds of years. The music echoed off the stone walls, making it sound like twice as many voices were singing. Finally, King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared to leave the abbey. They would walk out in a grand procession, followed by important members of the royal family. William and Kate gathered their children and got ready to follow the king and queen. "Remember to walk slowly," Kate reminded the children, "and smile for the people outside." Louis yawned but tried to hide it. He had been so good for so long. George stood very straight, ready to do his duty. Charlotte checked her dress one last time. The huge doors of Westminster Abbey opened. Outside, thousands of people waited to see the newly crowned king. The sound of cheering could be heard even inside the church. The crowd had been waiting for hours in the sun to see this moment. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped into the sunlight first. The crowd's cheers grew even louder. The king raised his hand to wave, and the gold of his rings and crown sparkled in the bright light. Now it was time for William, Kate, and their children to follow. They lined up behind the king and queen, ready to walk out into the bright day as the next generation of the royal family. "Ready?" William asked his family. Kate nodded and took Louis's hand. George and Charlotte stood between their parents. "Ready, father," George said, speaking for all of them. Together, they prepared to step out of the ancient abbey and into the sunshine, where the next part of this historic day waited for them. The royal family stepped out of Westminster Abbey into the bright sunlight. The sound hit them like a wave. Thousands of people cheering, clapping, and calling their names. The sky was still clear blue, and the sun made all the golden parts of their clothes shine. William and Kate guided their children down the steps. Photographers stood in special areas, their cameras clicking fast to catch every moment. The children had been told about the cameras, but the number of flashes was still surprising. "Smile and wave," Kate reminded them gently. George, always serious about his duties, gave a perfect royal wave, hand raised, moving gently from side to side. Charlotte copied her brother, adding a small smile that made the crowd cheer louder. Louis, now tired after the long ceremony, managed a small wave before reaching for his mother's hand. William looked at his family with pride. They had done so well during the long, difficult ceremony. Even 5-year-old Louis had been better behaved than anyone expected. "You did wonderfully," he told his children as they reached the bottom of the steps. A line of royal cars waited for them. The plan was for the king and queen to ride in the golden state coach, a huge old-fashioned carriage pulled by 8 white horses. William and his family would follow in cars, then join the king and queen at Buckingham Palace. But King Charles had a surprise for them. A royal aide approached William and whispered something to him. William's eyebrows went up in surprise. "Change of plans," he told Kate. "Father wants the children to ride with them in the second carriage." Kate looked concerned. "Are you sure? It wasn't in the program." William nodded. "He thinks the people would love to see the children. It's a special request." This was unusual. Royal events normally followed strict plans that were made months in advance, but the king had the final say. William bent down to his children's level. "Grandfather has asked if you would like to ride in a special carriage with him and Grandmother Camilla. Would you like that?" The children's faces lit up. Even George, who was usually so careful about showing his feelings, couldn't hide his excitement. A real carriage with horses? Louis asked, suddenly not tired anymore. Yes, a real carriage with horses, William confirmed. The royal aide led them to a different spot where they waited for a few minutes. Soon, the golden state coach came into view. It was huge and covered in gold, with paintings on its sides. 8 white horses pulled it, each one wearing red and gold decorations. The crowd cheered wildly as the coach passed. Behind it came a smaller but still beautiful carriage. This one was dark blue with gold trim, and was pulled by 6 black horses. It stopped in front of William and his family. Inside sat King Charles and Queen Camilla. The king waved his hand, inviting the children to join them. A footman in a red uniform opened the carriage door and put down small steps to help the children climb in. "Go ahead," Kate encouraged them. "Father and I will follow in the next car." Charlotte went first, carefully climbing the steps in her long dress. She gave a perfect curtsy to the king and queen before sitting down. George followed, giving a small bow before taking his seat across from his grandfather. Louis needed a little help from the footman, but managed to climb in and sit between his brother and sister. Queen Camilla leaned forward and adjusted Louis's collar, which had gotten twisted. She smiled warmly at the children. "We thought you might like a proper carriage ride," she said. "After all, you were so good during the ceremony." William and Kate stood back, watching their children sitting with the king and queen. It made a perfect picture. The present monarch with the future generations of the royal family. The footman closed the carriage door. King Charles gave a signal, and the horses began to move forward. The children waved from the windows of the carriage. The crowd loved seeing the young royals and cheered even louder. "Wave to your parents," Queen Camilla reminded them. The 3 children turned and waved at William and Kate, who stood watching the carriage pull away. This unexpected change of plans would make the newspapers tomorrow. The new king sharing his special day with his grandchildren. William and Kate watched the carriage with their children move away. Then they were guided to their own car. As they settled into the back seat, Kate let out a small sigh. "That wasn't in the plan," she said with a smile. "But I think it's wonderful." William nodded. "Father has been full of surprises lately. I think becoming king has made him more flexible." Their car joined the long line of vehicles following the royal carriages. The route to Buckingham Palace was lined with people 10 rows deep in some places. The crowd had been waiting since early morning, many camping overnight to get the best spots. "Look at all those people," Kate said, looking out the window. "They've waited so long just to catch a glimpse of the carriages." William watched the crowd too. It means a lot to them. Days like this connect people to history, to something bigger than themselves. In the carriage ahead, the children were having the time of their lives. The carriage bounced gently on its big springs as the horses pulled it through the streets of London. Louis kept looking up at the roof of the carriage, amazed by the fancy designs inside. "This is much better than a car," Charlotte said, running her hand over the soft blue velvet seats. King Charles smiled at his granddaughter. "I thought you might like it. When I was a boy, I rode in this same carriage at my mother's coronation." "Really? This exact same one?" George asked, eyes wide. The king nodded. "Yes, and my grandfather rode in it too, and his father before him. This carriage is older than Westminster Abbey." "Wow," Louis said. "It's even older than you, grandfather." Queen Camilla laughed at this. Even King Charles couldn't help smiling at Louis's innocent comment. As the carriage rolled down the Mall, the wide road leading to Buckingham Palace, the crowds got even bigger. People pressed against the barriers, waving flags and taking pictures with their phones. Some held up signs that said, "God save the king," or "We love the royal children." "They're waving at us," Charlotte said. "Should we wave back?" "Absolutely," King Charles replied. "That's our job today, to thank them for coming." All 3 children moved to the windows and waved at the crowd. The people loved seeing the young royals and cheered even louder. Louis, now fully awake and excited, waved with both hands, making the crowd laugh and cheer. Behind them, in their car, William and Kate could see their children waving from the carriage. "They're natural at this," William said proudly. Kate squeezed his hand. "They've had good teachers." The procession moved slowly toward Buckingham Palace. This gave everyone a chance to see the new king and his family. Police officers on horses rode alongside the carriages to keep everyone safe. As they got closer to the palace, George noticed something in the sky. "Look," he said, pointing up. "Airplanes." Everyone looked up to see 9 fighter jets flying in perfect formation. As they watched, the jets released trails of red, white, and blue smoke, the colors of the British flag. This was called the flypast, a special honor for important royal events. They'd practiced that for weeks, King Charles told the children, just for today. The planes roared overhead, making Louis cover his ears. Charlotte and George watched with wide eyes as the colored smoke made a perfect pattern in the sky. The carriage finally turned through the tall gates of Buckingham Palace. The huge building stood before them, its hundreds of windows shining in the sunlight. Staff members lined up on both sides of the driveway, clapping as the carriage passed. "We're almost there," Queen Camilla told the children. "Soon comes the best part of the day." "What's that?" asked Louis. "Standing on the balcony," King Charles answered, "where we can see all the people who came to celebrate with us." The carriage came to a stop at the main entrance of the palace. Footmen in red and gold uniforms rushed forward to open the doors. The children prepared to step down into the final part of this historic day, the balcony appearance that would be remembered forever. Inside Buckingham Palace, the royal family gathered in a large room with gold furniture. The walls were covered with paintings of kings and queens from long ago. Staff members moved quickly around them, helping with their clothes and bringing drinks of water. William and Kate were reunited with their children, who ran to them excitedly. "Did you see us in the carriage?" Louis asked, jumping up and down. "We did," Kate said, smoothing his hair, which had become messy during the ride. "You all looked wonderful." Charlotte couldn't stop talking about the carriage ride. "Grandfather told us the carriage is hundreds of years old, and Queen Camilla let me hold her special handkerchief when my nose got itchy from the flowers." George was more interested in the planes. "Father, did you see the red, white, and blue smoke? How do they make the colors come out like that?" William smiled at his son's questions. "It's a special colored dye they add to the smoke. Maybe we can read about how it works tomorrow." The family had a few minutes to rest before the final event of the day, appearing on the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace. This was the moment that would be on the front page of newspapers around the world tomorrow. A royal aide approached them. "5 minutes until the balcony appearance, Your Royal Highnesses." Kate took the children to a nearby bathroom to wash their hands and check their appearances one last time. She helped Charlotte straighten her dress and fixed a loose strand of her own hair. "Remember," she told the children, "when we're on the balcony, stand still and wave. Millions of people will be watching, not just the crowd outside." "Millions?" Louis asked, his eyes wide. "On television and in photos," Kate explained. "This is a day people will remember for many years." When they returned, King Charles and Queen Camilla were waiting. The king had changed into yet another outfit, this one a military uniform with many medals. He wore a different crown too, smaller than the ones from earlier but still very grand. "Are we all ready?" King Charles asked, looking at his family. Everyone nodded. A staff member opened a set of tall glass doors that led to the balcony. The sound of the crowd outside grew louder as the doors opened. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped out first. The cheers from outside became so loud that the palace seemed to shake. William and Kate followed with their children between them. The view from the balcony was amazing. The entire mall was filled with people as far as they could see. Thousands of flags waved in the air. Some people had climbed trees or stood on benches to get a better view. Camera flashes sparkled like stars throughout the crowd. "Wave," William reminded the children quietly. All three children raised their hands and waved to the crowd. Louis, in typical Louis fashion, waved with both hands over his head. This made the crowd cheer even louder. Charlotte and George waved more formally, just as they had been taught. King Charles stepped forward and raised his hand. The crowd grew quieter, watching their new king. "Thank you all for being here today," he called out in a strong voice. "God bless you all." The crowd erupted in cheers again. Suddenly, the sound of trumpets filled the air. This was the signal for another flyby of planes. Everyone on the balcony looked up as more jets flew overhead, making a perfect V shape. As they watched the planes,